The rain pounded against the windows of Samantha's modest suburban home as she stared down at the ominous letter in her trembling hands. The bold text seemed to jump off the page, filling her with a sense of dread. No notice of violation. Unauthorized financial installation. Her heart raced as she read the fine print. A penalty of $10,000 if she failed to remove the newly constructed cedar fence surrounding her backyard within 30 days. Samantha's mind whirled. How could this be happening? She had followed every single one of the homeowners associations, HOA, arcane rules to the letter. A loud knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. Cautiously peering through the peephole, Samantha's blood ran cold. It was Karen, the tyrannical HOA president, flanked by 2 burly security guards. "Open up, Samantha." Karen's shrill voice pierced the air. "We know you're in there. Time's up for your little fence stunt." Samantha's hands trembled as she slowly unlocked the door, mustering all her courage. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded. "I followed your rules exactly when I installed that fence." Karen sneered, her beady eyes narrowing. "Oh, don't play innocent with me. We have photographic evidence that your fence violates our community guidelines." She brandished a manila envelope, its contents spilling out to reveal incriminating snapshots. Samantha's jaw dropped as she studied the photos. The fence appeared to be perfectly aligned with the HOA's specifications. But this can't be right," she stammered. "I had the mayor himself approve the plans." A sinister grin spread across Karen's face. "Ah, yes, the mayor *." She let out a hollow laugh. "Do you really think that worthless bureaucrat has any sway over the HOA?" She stepped forward, her voice dripping with disdain. "We own this community, Samantha, and we don't take kindly to anyone who tries to undermine our authority." Samantha's mind raced as she realized the full gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about a simple fence violation. It was a calculated power play by the HOA to crush her and anyone else who dared to challenge their iron-fisted rule. "You can't do this," Samantha cried, her voice quivering. "I'll fight you in court. I have the mayor's approval, and—" Karen silenced her with a raised hand. "Save it, dear. The HOA has special arrangements with the local judiciary. Your little evidence won't hold up." She gestured to the guards, who began to advance menacingly. "Now, are you going to remove that fence, or are we going to have to make you?" Samantha's heart pounded as she weighed her options. She could either submit to the HOA's demands and lose the privacy and security she had worked so hard to attain, or she could risk escalating the confrontation and potentially face even greater consequences. As the guards closed in, Samantha knew she had to make a choice, one that would determine the fate of her home, her family, and her very way of life. The stakes had never been higher, and the path forward was shrouded in uncertainty. The HOA's ruthless power play has put Samantha in an impossible situation. Will she be able to outmaneuver the corrupt organization, or will she be forced to surrender to their demands? The battle for control of this suburban community has only just begun. Samantha's mind raced as she stared down the imposing figures of the HOA security guards, their expressions cold and unyielding. She knew she had to act fast, but every option seemed fraught with risk. Suddenly, inspiration struck. Squaring her shoulders, Samantha met Karen's gaze with a newfound resolve. "All right, you win. I'll remove the fence." The words felt like acid on her tongue, but she forced herself to remain calm and composed. Karen's lips curled into a triumphant smile. "Wise choice, my dear. I knew you'd see reason." She turned to the guards. "Get to work. I want that eyesore gone by the end of the day." As the guards moved to carry out their orders, Samantha raised a hand. "Wait, there's just one condition." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Condition? You're hardly in a position to negotiate." Samantha took a deep breath. I want to document the entire process. For my own records, of course. She flashed a polite smile, but her eyes betrayed a steely determination. Karen regarded her for a moment, then let out a dismissive chuckle. Fine, whatever. But no funny business, understand? She nodded to the guards, who begrudgingly stepped aside, allowing Samantha to retrieve her phone. Samantha quickly activated the camera, her fingers trembling slightly as she recorded the guards methodically dismantling her fence. Karen stood nearby, arms crossed, a triumphant glint in her eye. As the last panel of the fence was removed, Samantha couldn't help but feel a pang of loss. This wasn't just a simple structure. It represented her family's hard-earned privacy and security. But she knew that dwelling on it now would only play into the HOA's hands. They're all done, Karen announced, clapping her hands together. Now, I trust there won't be any more. Incidents from you, Samantha. Samantha forced a polite smile. Of course not, Karen. I'm a model homeowner, as you know. She paused, then added, speaking of which, I was wondering if you could clarify something for me. Karen's brow furrowed. And what might that be? Well, I noticed that the fence plans I submitted were approved by the mayor himself. Yet, you're telling me that the HOA has special arrangements with the local judiciary. Samantha fixed Karen with a pointed stare. So, which is it? Does the mayor's approval hold weight or not? Karen's expression darkened, and Samantha could practically see the gears turning in her mind as she searched for a response. The mayor's approval is irrelevant when it comes to HOA matters, she finally said, her voice tinged with irritation. Our bylaws supersede any municipal authority. Samantha nodded, feigning understanding. I see. So the HOA is essentially a law unto itself. Is that correct? Karen's jaw tightened. You're treading on thin ice, Samantha. I'd advise you to tread carefully. Oh, I'm well aware of that, Samantha replied, her tone dripping with sarcasm. After all, I wouldn't want to run afoul of the all-powerful HOA, would I? The tension in the air was palpable as the two women engaged in a silent battle of wills. Samantha knew she was playing a dangerous game, but she also recognized that this was her only chance to gain the upper hand. Finally, Karen broke the silence, her voice laced with barely concealed anger. You've made your point, Samantha. Now, I suggest you go back inside and mind your own business. Unless, of course, you'd like to join your precious fence in the dumpster. Samantha held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded reluctantly. Very well. I'll be in touch. As she watched the HOA entourage depart, Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger, more complex battle. The stakes had been raised, and she knew that Karen and the HOA were not about to back down without a fight. Samantha may have won the first round, but the HOA's grip on power runs deep. With the mayor's approval seemingly meaningless, she'll have to find new ways to outmaneuver the corrupt organization. The war for control of the community has only just begun. The rhythmic pounding of the rain against the window panes was the only sound that broke the eerie silence in Samantha's living room as she replayed the confrontation with Karen and the HOA guards over and over in her mind. She had managed to stall their efforts to remove the fence, but she knew it was only a temporary victory. The HOA's power and influence ran deep, and they would not be deterred so easily. Samantha's gaze fell upon the video footage she had captured on her phone, and a spark of determination ignited within her. If the HOA thought they could simply bully her into submission, they had another thing coming. Quickly, she opened her laptop and began to meticulously comb through the recordings, looking for any inconsistencies or discrepancies that could work in her favor. As she watched the guards disassemble the fence, her eyes narrowed. There, in the corner of the frame, a flash of something caught her attention. Rewinding the footage, Samantha paused and zoomed in, her heart pounding as she recognized the familiar logo of the mayor's office emblazoned on one of the guards' uniforms. So, it's not just the HOA and the local judiciary, she murmured to herself, her mind racing. The mayor's office is involved too. Samantha leaned back in her chair, her fingers drumming against the desk as she contemplated her next move. She knew that taking on the HOA was a daunting task, but with the mayor's office potentially implicated, the stakes had just been raised. Suddenly, an idea began to take shape in her mind. Grabbing her phone, she quickly scrolled through her contacts, her fingers pausing on a familiar name. "Hello?" A gruff voice answered on the other end of the line. "Hey, Dad," Samantha said, her voice laced with urgency. "I need your help." Her father, a retired lawyer with a reputation for being uncompromising, listened intently as Samantha laid out the situation. As she spoke, his brow furrowed, and a glint of determination flashed in his eyes. "So the HOA and the mayor's office are in cahoots, huh?" he murmured, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "Well, that certainly complicates things." "I need to find a way to expose their corruption, Dad," Samantha pleaded. "I can't let them get away with this." There was a brief pause, and then her father's voice crackled to life. "All right, here's what we're going to do." Over the next few hours, Samantha meticulously followed her father's instructions, collecting evidence, reaching out to local news outlets, and carefully crafting a plan of attack. As the sun began to set, casting an eerie glow over the rainy neighborhood, she sat back, a determined smile spreading across her face. "Time to take the fight to the HOA," she whispered, her fingers tightening around her phone. The next morning, the residents of the quiet suburban community awoke to a flurry of headlines and breaking news reports. Local Homeowners Association accused of corruption, abuse of power. Whistleblower reveals collusion between HOA and mayor's office. Suburban residents demand transparency, accountability from troubled HOA. Samantha watched with a mix of satisfaction and trepidation as the story unfolded, her father's words echoing in her mind. "This is just the beginning, Samantha. The HOA is not going to go down without a fight." As the day wore on, the tension in the community palpably grew. Angry residents began to gather, demanding answers from the beleaguered HOA. Samantha could see the fear and desperation in Karen's eyes as she desperately tried to contain the situation, her usual bravado and confidence shaken. Samantha has struck a blow against the corrupt HOA, but the battle is far from over. With the mayor's office now in the spotlight, the stakes have been raised even higher. As the community rises up against the entrenched powers, the outcome remains uncertain. But one thing is clear. The war for control has only just begun. The once tranquil streets of the suburban community were now alive with the angry shouts and chants of the gathered residents, their faces etched with a mix of outrage and determination. The air crackled with tension as they confronted the beleaguered HOA officials, who had retreated behind the locked doors of their headquarters, their once imposing presence now reduced to a facade of desperation. Amidst the chaos, Samantha stood in the shadows, her gaze fixed on the scene unfolding before her. She had ignited the spark that had set this firestorm in motion, but now she knew that the true test was yet to come. As the clamor outside reached a fever pitch, Samantha's phone suddenly came to life, the familiar ringtone cutting through the din. Glancing down, she felt a surge of trepidation as she recognized the caller ID. It was her father. "Dad?" she answered, her voice barely audible over the din of the crowd. "Samantha, you need to get out of there." Her father's voice crackled through the line, laced with urgency. "Things are about to get ugly." Samantha's brow furrowed as she scanned the crowd, her eyes narrowing as she noticed the growing presence of uniformed figures, their bodies language tense and rigid. "What do you mean?" she asked, her heart pounding. "The mayor's office has ordered the police to intervene," her father replied, his voice strained. "They're going to try to disperse the crowd by force." Samantha's breath caught in her throat as the realization dawned on her. But the mayor's office is in on this whole thing. They're trying to cover it up. Exactly, her father replied grimly. You need to get out of there, Samantha. This is going to get ugly, and you don't want to be caught in the crossfire. Samantha bit her lip, her mind racing as she weighed her options. She could heed her father's warning and retreat to safety, or she could stay and bear witness to the unfolding events, determined to see this through to the end. In the end, the choice was an easy one. Squaring her shoulders, Samantha took a deep breath and stepped forward, her voice rising above the din. Everyone, listen up, she shouted, her words cutting through the chaos. The police are on their way to shut this down, but we can't let them. The crowd fell silent, dozens of pairs of eyes turning towards her. Samantha could feel the weight of their expectation, the desperate need for a leader to guide them through this crisis. We've come too far to back down now, she continued, her voice steadying. The HOA and the mayor's office are in cahoots, and they're trying to cover up their corruption. But we won't let them. A roar of approval went up from the crowd, and Samantha felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins. We need to stand our ground and demand accountability, she declared, her gaze sweeping across the sea of faces. We need to show them that we won't be intimidated, that we won't be silenced. As the crowd erupted into cheers and applause, Samantha caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of her eye. Turning, she watched in horror as a line of police officers, their faces set in grim determination, began to advance towards the crowd, their riot shields and batons at the ready. Hold your ground, Samantha shouted, her voice steady and resolute. Don't let them push us back. The air crackled with tension as the standoff unfolded, the clash between the determined residents and the overwhelming force of the police unleashing a torrent of chaos and violence. Samantha stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest, as she watched the events unfold, knowing that the future of her community hung in the balance. Asterisk, the confrontation between the residents and the police has reached a fever pitch, and Samantha finds herself at the center of the storm. With the mayor's office and the HOA conspiring to silence the community, the stakes have never been higher. Will Samantha and her fellow residents be able to withstand the onslaught, or will the corrupt powers that be emerge victorious? The battle for control of the community rages on. Asterisk. The air was thick with the acrid scent of tear gas as Samantha fought to keep her eyes open, her lungs burning with each ragged breath. All around her, chaos reigned as the police, armed with batons and riot shields, clashed with the defiant residents, their cries of outrage and pain echoing through the streets. Despite the overwhelming force bearing down on them, the community refused to back down. Samantha could see the determination in their eyes, the unwavering refusal to be silenced or intimidated. It was in that moment that she knew they had to keep fighting, no matter the cost. Gritting her teeth, Samantha surged forward, her body shielding a young woman who had been knocked to the ground by a baton-wielding officer. "Get up," she yelled, her voice hoarse. "We can't let them win." The woman's eyes widened in surprise, but she quickly found her footing, joining Samantha in the thick of the melee. Together, they pushed back against the advancing line of police, their movements a desperate dance of protest and resistance. As the confrontation reached a fever pitch, a familiar figure emerged from the chaos. Karen, the HOA president, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and triumph. "This is madness," she shrieked, her voice barely audible over the din. "You're all under arrest for unlawful assembly. Disperse immediately, or we'll use force." Samantha felt a surge of anger rise within her, and she took a step forward, her finger pointed accusingly at the HOA leader. "You're the one who's mad, Karen," she shouted. "This is all you're doing, isn't it? You and the mayor's office have been colluding to keep the community under your thumb." Karen's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Samantha saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. But it was quickly replaced by a renewed sense of defiance. "I don't know what you're talking about," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. This is all your fault, Samantha. If you had just played by the rules, none of this would be happening. Samantha opened her mouth to retort, but before she could, the air was rent by the piercing wail of sirens. Turning, she watched in horror as a convoy of police vehicles, their lights flashing, pulled up to the scene, disgorging a fresh wave of officers. "Retreat," Samantha shouted, her voice urgent. "We need to regroup and figure out our next move." The residents, their resolve wavering in the face of the overwhelming show of force, began to disperse, their cries of protest fading into the night. Samantha watched them go, her heart heavy with a sense of defeat. As the dust settled, she found herself face to face with Karen, the HOA president's expression a twisted mask of triumph. "Well, well," Karen purred, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Looks like your little rebellion has been crushed. I hope you're proud of yourself, Samantha." Samantha's jaw tightened, and she felt a surge of defiance rise within her. "This isn't over, Karen," she hissed. "We're not going to stop until we expose your corruption and the collusion between the HOA and the mayor's office." Karen let out a cold, mirthless laugh. "Oh, Samantha, you really are a fool, aren't you?" She shook her head, her eyes gleaming with malice. "The mayor's office is firmly in our pocket, and the police are under our control. You don't stand a chance." Samantha opened her mouth to retort, but before she could, Karen raised a hand, silencing her. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some emergency measures to implement," she said, a cruel smile spreading across her face. "You'd better watch your step, Samantha. The HOA doesn't take kindly to troublemakers." With that, Karen turned on her heel and disappeared into the night, leaving Samantha standing alone, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and determination. The confrontation between the residents and the authorities has ended in defeat, with the HOA and the mayor's office emerging victorious. But Samantha refuses to give up, even as the odds seem to stack against her. With the HOA tightening its grip on the community and the police under its control, she knows that the true battle is only just beginning. Can she find a way to overcome the entrenched powers and expose their corruption, or will the community be forced to submit to the HOA's tyrannical rule? The air was thick with tension as Samantha paced the dimly lit living room, her mind racing with a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The events of the previous night had left her shaken, but also more determined than ever to uncover the truth and put an end to the HOA's reign of terror. As she replayed the confrontation in her mind, she couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal. The mayor's office, the very institution that was supposed to serve and protect the community, had instead colluded with the corrupt HOA to silence the residents. Samantha's gaze fell upon the stack of documents and evidence she had meticulously gathered, a glimmer of hope sparking within her. She knew that the path ahead would be fraught with obstacles and risks, but she was more convinced than ever that the only way to restore justice and accountability was to take the fight directly to the heart of the corrupt power structure. Steeling her resolve, Samantha reached for her phone and began to dial a series of numbers. She knew that she couldn't take on the HOA and the mayor's office alone, and she needed to enlist the help of those who shared her vision for a just and transparent community. As the calls connected, Samantha laid out her plan, her voice steady and unwavering. One by one, the voices on the other end of the line pledged their support, their own experiences with the HO's heavy-handed tactics fueling their determination to see this through. With a renewed sense of purpose, Samantha set to work, coordinating with her newfound allies to devise a strategy that would expose the depth of the corruption at the heart of the community. They would need to tread carefully, she knew, as the HOA and the mayor's office would undoubtedly be watching their every move. As the days turned into weeks, Samantha and her team meticulously pieced together the puzzle, uncovering a web of collusion and abuse of power that extended far beyond the boundaries of the HOA. They followed the money trail, traced the connections between the HOA's leadership and the mayor's office, and gathered a mountain of evidence that would be the key to bringing down the corrupt regime. Finally, The day of reckoning arrived. Samantha and her team, armed with their findings, summoned a press conference, drawing a crowd of local media and concerned residents. As the cameras rolled and the microphones were thrust in their faces, they laid bare the shocking truth. The HOA and the mayor's office had been operating a vast and elaborate scheme to line their own pockets, exploiting the community's resources and silencing those who dared to speak out. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Outraged residents flooded the streets, their cries of anger and demand for accountability echoing through the neighborhood. The mayor, his face a mask of panic, rushed to distance himself from the scandal, while the HOA leadership, led by the now beleaguered Karen, desperately tried to spin the narrative. But Samantha and her team were relentless, their evidence and testimony proving too overwhelming to ignore. As the story gained national attention, the pressure on the mayor and the HOA became too great to sustain, and the house of cards began to crumble. In the end, the corrupt powers that be were brought to their knees, their crimes exposed for all the world to see. Samantha stood amidst the rubble, a triumphant smile on her face, as the community she had fought so hard to protect began to rebuild, this time with a renewed sense of unity and purpose. Samantha and her team has succeeded in exposing the deep-rooted corruption at the heart of the community, bringing down the tyrannical HOA and the complicit mayor's office. But the aftermath of their victory is only just beginning, as the community must now grapple with the task of healing and rebuilding in the wake of the scandal. Can they come together to forge a brighter future, or will the scars of the past continue to haunt them? The story is far from over. The air was thick with the scent of change as the community began to rebuild in the aftermath of the HOA scandal. Samantha watched with a mixture of pride and trepidation as the residents, once cowed by the HOA's iron-fisted rule, now rallied together to reclaim their rightful place within the neighborhood. The fallout from the corruption expose had been swift and severe. Karen, the former HOA president, had been arrested and charged with a litany of crimes, her once imposing presence reduced to a shell of its former self as she languished behind bars. The mayor, his political career in tatters, had been forced to resign, his replacement vowing to restore trust and transparency within the local government. Yet, even as the dominant power structures crumbled, Samantha couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The scars of the past were deep, and she knew that healing the community would be no easy task. As the residents gathered to discuss the way forward, Samantha listened intently, her gaze scanning the room for any signs of lingering tension or distrust. The atmosphere was tense, with many still grappling with the betrayal they had experienced at the hands of the HOA and the mayor's office. "We need to start from scratch," one resident, a fiery-eyed woman named Eliza, declared. "The HOA is finished, and we need to make sure that nothing like that ever happens again." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, and Samantha felt a surge of hope. Perhaps, with the right leadership and a renewed commitment to community, they could forge a brighter future. But how do we ensure that the mistakes of the past aren't repeated? A concerned voice piped up from the back of the room. The HOA had a lot of power, and it's going to take time to undo all the damage they've done. Samantha's brow furrowed as she considered the question. She knew that simply dismantling the HOA wasn't enough. They needed to put in place new structures and safeguards to prevent a similar crisis from unfolding. Clearing her throat, Samantha stepped forward, her voice confident and unwavering. "We need to create a new governing body, one that is accountable to the community, not to a select few. A board of trustees, elected by the residents, with strict guidelines and transparency measures in place." The room fell silent as the residents considered her words, and Samantha could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. "And what about the mayor's office?" another resident asked, his brow furrowed. "They were in on this whole thing, weren't they? How can we trust them to play by the rules this time?" Samantha took a deep breath, her mind racing. "We need to demand a complete overhaul of the local government," she replied, her voice steady. New leadership, new policies, and a renewed commitment to serving the community, not the interests of the powerful few. The residents murmured in agreement, their expressions a mix of hope and determination. Samantha could feel the momentum building, the collective energy of the community fueling her own resolve. "We've come too far to give up now," she declared, her voice rising above the din. "We're going to rebuild this community from the ground up, and we're going to do it the right way. No more corruption, no more abuse of power, just a community that works for everyone." The residents erupted into thunderous applause, their faces alight with a newfound sense of purpose. Samantha stood tall, her heart swelling with pride, knowing that the battle had been hard won, but the true work was only just beginning. Asterisk, the community has taken the first step toward healing and rebuilding, but the road ahead is far from easy. With the HOA and the mayor's office toppled, Samantha and her fellow residents must now navigate the complex task of creating a new, transparent, and accountable governing structure that will serve the needs of the entire community. Can they overcome the lingering distrust and division to forge a brighter future, or will the scars of the past continue to haunt them? The journey has only just begun. Asterisk. The once quiet streets of the suburban community were now alive with the sound of hammers and saws, as the residents worked tirelessly to rebuild and revitalize their neighborhood. Gone were the imposing gates and the unyielding rules of the HOA, replaced by a renewed sense of community spirit and a shared vision for a better future. Samantha stood at the center of it all, her eyes shining with a mix of pride and determination. The past few months had been a whirlwind of activity, as she and her fellow residents worked to create a new governing body that would truly serve the needs of the community. The process had not been an easy one. Tensions still ran high, and there were those who remained skeptical of the changes, fearful of the unknown. But Samantha and her team had refused to be deterred, tirelessly reaching out to their neighbors, building bridges, and fostering a sense of unity that had been sorely lacking under the HOA's reign. As the new community council took shape, Samantha found herself at the helm, her voice one of the most prominent in shaping the future of the neighborhood. She knew that the responsibility was heavy, but she was more than ready to shoulder the burden. One of the council's first orders of business was to address the lingering issues left in the wake of the HOA scandal. Homes that had been seized or fined under the corrupt organization's rules were carefully reviewed, and where possible, restitution was made. The community's funds, which had been misappropriated by the HOA, were audited and redistributed to various projects that the residents had identified as priorities. Samantha watched with a sense of satisfaction as the community began to flourish, the air thick with the scent of new beginnings. Neighbors who had once been strangers now greeted each other with warmth and camaraderie, their shared experiences binding them together in a way that the HOA could never have achieved. But even as the community's transformation took root, Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that the true test was yet to come. The former HOA leadership, led by the ever-defiant Karen, had managed to evade the most serious charges, and there were whispers that they were plotting a comeback. Determined to nip any such efforts in the bud, Samantha and the community council worked tirelessly to strengthen the new governing structure, putting in place robust safeguards and transparency measures to prevent a repeat of the past. They forged partnerships with local law enforcement and the revamped mayor's office, ensuring that the community's interests were always at the forefront. As the days turned into weeks, the community's transformation continued apace, with new parks, community centers, and local businesses springing up in the wake of the HOA's demise. Samantha couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as she walked the streets, her gaze sweeping over the familiar faces of her neighbors, all of whom had played a part in the community's rebirth. But even as the community celebrated its newfound freedom, Samantha couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the battle was far from over. The former HOA leadership, though weakened, still lurked in the shadows, and she knew that they would stop at nothing to regain their foothold in the community. Squaring her shoulders, Samantha made her way to the community council's headquarters, her mind already racing with plans and strategies to counteract any future threats. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but she was more determined than ever to ensure that the hard-won victories of the past would not be undone. Samantha and the community have triumphed over the corrupt HOA and the mayor's office, but the journey towards true, lasting change is far from over. With the new governing structure in place, they must now work tirelessly to solidify their gains and protect the community from any attempts by the former power brokers to regain control. The battle for the heart and soul of the neighborhood continues, and Samantha knows that she must remain vigilant, lest the hard-won progress be swept away by the ever-looming shadow of the past asterisk.